This is the Page Publishing Book Club. How you doing? I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. Hey, if you're looking for some inspiration, we got enough to go around on this show. I'll bet you know what you do, and you could probably explain to someone how you do it, but do you really know why you do what you do? What your purpose in life is? Well, this is where our journey begins with Rodney S. Jones, author of Corporate Swagger, The Secret to Winning the Corporate Game.
To get to the what I do, I first need to tell you why I did it. When I was 22, I went to the University of Texas. I majored in music. I'm trained to sing classical music. And I got a phone call from my mom. When I heard her voice, I knew the sound. I knew what was going on because I had lived in an abusive household, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, physical abuse towards me, my sisters, her. And before I left for college, I told her, hey, if he ever puts his hands on you again, I don't care where I am, I'm calling the cops. Because I felt like as her oldest and only son, I should have done something, when in actuality, what could I have done, right? I was small. It was May of 1998. She called me, same sound in her voice, said, hang up the phone, I already know what's going on, I'm calling the cops. They lived in Birmingham, Alabama at the time. And they came, picked him up. I called her back. She said he was gone. I said, send my sisters, my two younger sisters, they were 12 and 15. I said, it's about to be summertime. I'm done with classes. Send them up here to be with me for the rest of the summer while you and Dad get that thing worked out. And then I'll send them back. Well, when they get there, they start enlightening me on everything else that was going on, more of what I was used to before I left for college and a little bit, extra sauce on top of it. And I just couldn't see myself sending them back. And so I asked them, I said, do you all want to stay with me? And they said, we've been trying to stay with you for the past 2 years. They just wouldn't let us, call you or anything like that. And so I went through the process of acquiring full legal custody of my two younger sisters. So I went from fraternity parties and step shows and kicking it to parent-teacher conferences, homework, a father figure overnight. And I realized that something had to give. I had to continue working because I needed a roof over our head, but school was getting in the way. So I left school without graduating. But when I did that, I found myself competing with people who had experience, had degrees, had connections. They had everything that I did not have. The only thing that they didn't have was a true reason why. Their why was, prestige, cachet, it was fame, it was, I got a job, I just graduated. Mine was, I got 2 mouths to feed. And so through a lot of trial and error, I wasn't getting the jobs that I would apply for. And what I found in that trial and error was there were certain traits that employers coveted as much as or even more than what degree or school or GPA you had. And as I learned that, I started leveraging that. And so in every interview I went into, I learned a little bit more, and I got good at highlighting those traits about who I was, not covering up what I didn't have. I was very transparent with what I didn't have, but I instead focused the attention and their attention on these intangibles that they saw as golden within their organization and how I exuded them. And I got so good at it that I started snatching jobs from more qualified people, which I did. As a result of that, I started sort of collecting hey, what did I do to get to this point after, managing in the financial industry, becoming, licensed. I even had a stint in recruiting, which is where a lot of my insight came from, because conversations that were had on one side of the table and behind closed doors, those were the most vital conversations that candidates weren't privy to. And I felt like, well, why don't we tell this to the candidate? Because if we don't, they're going to go right down the street to their next interview and make the same mistake. So when you take all of that and just a heart to give back, I decided to put it all on paper and write down these unspoken rules. Hey, this is what they're not telling you. This is what is not written in a textbook, but I guarantee you when you leave college, or even if you're out of college, as you try to matriculate up the corporate ladder, or if you're an entrepreneur, as you try to win clients, these are the things that people are looking for that aren't on paper, that aren't on the surface. So my why is to empower the underdog to compete on a stage that statistically they're not qualified to be on and win. And it's from that why that I do everything. How I do it is through speaking, through coaching, or through writing the book. And the what is these unspoken rules, these hidden secrets that the people who are successful, they know them well. But those underdogs, those people who don't have all the qualifications, all of the letters behind their name, they don't have these things. They don't know them. But everyone can possess them. And so I took it upon myself to show people how to bring those things out because I felt like if I could do it, surely others can.
And you said you've already been a lecturer, so this book will just kind of be an added plus when you go out and talk to people. Now they can use your book and take that with them.
Absolutely.
All right, Rodney, great story. Good luck. Listening to an expert give a speech on 66 ideas for innovation, John DiNapoli was inspired to keep it simple yet interesting when he became a coach and decided to write 101 leadership ideas, every single one important, right, John?
You really can't say that I'm really good at leadership, but I don't do these 3 or 4 things. And I give them an example. You could be a great parent. I just forget to feed my kids. So, there isn't one, if you are not doing one specific thing in leadership, it becomes the most important thing. So you find basically 101 ideas alphabetically listed and a brief overview of where I've come up with these ideas in my 35 years in the military and, 25 years in the pharmaceutical industry. And, it even goes back to some of my time in athletics when I was a captain of my wrestling team. I think you learn all those ideas along the way. So what I've tried to do is basically put an idea down, something like honesty, and then talk a little bit about why it's important, and then give people an example of what I've seen of the impact of this idea in a leadership situation. So, yeah, there are little kind of vignettes and stories inside of each of those ideas to make it interesting and to make people recognize when they see, something that's being done well or not done well. And I think both of those have consequences. So I often tell people you learn more from a bad leader and what not to do than you sometimes learn from a good leader and what they are doing. So it helps people keep their eyes open. I have kind of gone off on my own and created a consulting firm where I do leadership training and development. So, I focus on it full time. And that encouraged me when I talk to people about, hey, how do you expand your experience in leadership? Well, one of the ways I think you do it is reading. And it's one of the things I talk about in the book, right? That I do believe that all good leaders are readers. Not all readers are good leaders, but I think you have to learn from other people. You can't make all the mistakes yourself. So,
was there a situation for you that was a turning point for you?
yeah, I think there have been multiple turning points. One of the reasons I left active duty is I was in a rapid deployment force with the 101st Airborne Division, and I was working for somebody that I thought he was a lieutenant colonel, he was a battalion commander, and I thought he was making irrational decisions about things. And I thought if we were ever called up to deploy, he would put my people at risk, and I would have to make a decision: do I follow what he tells me, or do I push back because I don't think it's a legal order? And I thought, I don't want to be in that situation going forward. Maybe I need to go do something else. And, it was one of the early thoughts for me that maybe I need to go into a civilian career. And I never really thought I was going to stay in the military. I kind of went back in because I missed flying helicopters. And I thought I'd fly for a year or two. And it just worked out that I ended up staying 27 additional years in the National Guard. So,
wow. What's interesting, though, is that bad leaders continue to be elevated in the corporate world, in the military. Somehow, I think the most egregious thing is elevation of people who don't. They're elevated because of who they know, not necessarily because of their skills.
yeah, and I think ultimately that hurts organizations, right? A lot of leaders want people around them that tell them how great they are. And I love the quote from General Patton that says, if we're all in the room thinking the same things, we don't all need to be there. So, I think the best organizations encourage different viewpoints and different ideas and different ways to process information. and they end up ultimately being more successful.
Very good, John. Well, I guess you don't have to do too much promotion because is this like a handbook when you go out and lecture?
I mean, that's really what I kind of wrote it for. So I was never expecting to be a best-selling author. It's been interesting that I have sold quite a few books through word of mouth and through LinkedIn. But very often what happens is I'll do a training session with 20 people or two training sessions with 40 people in a company, and they'll say, "Hey, can we get signed copies of your book?" Kind of as a reminder of some of the lessons that we learned or that we were developed through the training. So, and the same thing has happened when I've gone out and done speeches, and that's really what I thought, that I could leave something behind, because face it, when you go out and hear somebody speak or you do training, you don't remember or hang on everything that they do, right? You take a few pearls away, and I think this gives people an opportunity to put together some of those pearls that might make sense and help them continue to develop. Because, as leaders, you're either getting better or you're falling behind. It's like paddling in a current, right? When you stop developing, you fall behind your peers.
Yep. Doesn't matter how old you are. You got to keep growing. Thanks, John. Do you pass judgment on others? Are you biased against people for any reason? And more important, do you even realize you are biased? These are the questions Kurt LaRose attempts to help us answer in his book, Psychobabble Jabble. He's a licensed clinical social worker who turned tragedy into motivation.
So this book was a 10-year project. So it started in 2010, and it occurred after my nephew's traumatic brain injury, and he became an organ donor. His mother passed away a few years earlier, which was my sister. She died waiting on organs. And then a couple years later, almost to the month, he became an organ donor, her son, my nephew, and he died donating. So those two events kind of got my attention in 2010. And at that time, I decided that my significance as a professor at a small university, where I was teaching social work, and you can tell already I'm passionate about that, just wasn't as important as I thought. And so I decided that I was going to start visiting the Midwest and take some time to write a book. And over the course of 10 years, my training kicked in with client stories, family stories, a personal story, and then I put in all kinds of paradigms that you and I are biased about. We have all these judgments that we make, and they're often harsh. So that actually is how this project morphed from tragedy to, I don't know, I'll just call it a book about bias that says we all judge people harshly. And this book really does challenge it. Every chapter challenges our judgments. I wrote in the introduction of my book a dedication to Black. And to give you an idea of how paradigms can influence us, my dedication was to the abstract color, Black. And so already I've gone to the color itself, right? And I write about, to make Black, you need every other color of the kaleidoscope and the rainbow. And while Black is associated with darkness, and why Black is associated with things that are not light, everybody's favorite color is actually in the color Black. And each chapter of my book is divided into concepts and stories. And so the abstract is the part of the concept, and the Black one is an example of many. I'm not having a discussion whether or not people are good or bad. I'm not. I'm having a discussion about the possibility that there is another way to look at it. And that's all there is to it. There's just another way. And while research on bias says that it's not that successful, some of my favorite chapters in here actually tackle bias in a way that the reader won't even know they're getting tackled until they get to the very end of the chapter. They'll be like, oh, wow, I never even knew that story was going to make that ending, or I never knew it's going to go in that direction. You and I blink and breathe all day long, and that's subconscious. And our culture has come to the conclusion that subconscious and unconscious are synonyms. And there's the glitch. That's why we can't change our bias. We are subconsciously blinking and breathing, but if you and I wanted to right now, we could on purpose. You and I could have a blinking and breathing contest. And that's how bias must be attacked or tackled or addressed. We have to be aware that our subconscious is not unconscious, and we can be aware of our subconscious, but we have to do it on purpose. We have to choose to look at our bias. We have to choose to look at our prejudices. And that's the first part. And the last part is, it isn't really about being right or wrong, because I would suggest to the reader of this book that if being right is your goal, your bias will remain unchangeable, because everybody operates from the position of right. The issue is, can we just look at it? Do you see?
Yes, I do. And I hope our audience does too. Go to psychobabblejabbel.com for more information. And we got to take a quick break, but we're coming right back. This is the Page Publishing Book Club.
Have you written a book and want to get it published? Then now's the time to call Page Publishing at 800-204-6099 and do it immediately. You see, they're looking for authors of all types of books. And unlike most publishers, Page Publishing will take the time to review most of the books submitted to them. And they'll even give you their feedback. And if they like what they read, Page Publishing will get your book into bookstores and for sale online at Amazon, the Apple iTunes Store, and other outlets. They'll handle everything: copyright protection, printing, cover art, publicity, and editing. So if you've written a novel, a children's book, a cookbook, inspirational work, a book of poetry, or biography, and want to get it published, then you need to call Page Publishing and do it immediately. Call 800-204-6099 now for your free author submission kit. Your road to fame and fortune could very well start with this simple phone call. For your free author submission kit, call Page Publishing at 800-204-6099.
All right, we are back on the Page Publishing Book Club. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini, and Bob Dombrowski is back 7 years after he published his first book with Page. It was entitled 38 Years. This time, he pays homage to his childhood home, Detroit, in his new book, Poochki Day.
First off, I want to say something about Detroit, because Detroit, I don't think there's another city in the world that's gone through as many changes as Detroit. You know, we were once the big, made all the cars and factories and had 2 million people, and now we're down to 700,000. And so I really try to write about the way things were as opposed to how they are now. Now, Poochki Day is basically growing up in a city, being Polish, and we had like Polish neighborhoods. The day before Ash Wednesday, all the bakeries sold punchkis, these jelly donuts. And, you know, it starts off going to Easter Sunday in 1963 with my family, and we had just bought a brand new Buick, and my mom was driving it. And by the time she parked it in the church parking lot, she had hit something like 7 cars on Easter Sunday. And my dad had already got there. He's an usher in the church, so I had to go in and tell him what happened out in the parking lot. And just stories like that. Solstice, 21st of June, it's tradition back in Poland, and I brought a lot of the Polish stuff in America. How we carry over the traditions where you make a big bonfire and the boys jump over the bonfire. And so all the teenagers would go down to the park and the boys would jump over the bonfire to kind of show off to the girls and things like that. A lot of had to do around the church and the food we ate and families getting together and the kids hanging out. It was just fun. Well, I talk about things like, the Motor City. We made the cars. And I was really fortunate back then to grow up because there was so much money and jobs working in the factories. And so when we were about 18 years old, everybody had a hot rod, a nice car, the GTOs and the Boss Mustangs. And I have some funny stories of drag racing in the city. There's a funny story too in the book that people probably don't know, but there's this guy that came over from Poland and went up into northern Michigan and with an axe and a saw, cut trees down and dug up bricks and built this amazing restaurant called Legs Inn. It's been there forever, 100 years or something. And people that go to northern Michigan always stop at this Legs Inn for its Polish food, but just millions of stories. It jumps around, but it all comes together and it all flows. It's just like I'm talking now, if that makes any sense. I talk about Eddie Slovak. He was the only person executed in World War II for cowardice. He was a Polish guy from Detroit, and 65,000 soldiers that were arrested for desertion and this and that. But of all of them, they only executed one guy. And he didn't do anything that hurt anybody. He just couldn't fight. He was scared. And I talk about how back in the 30s during the Depression, my mom told me that when they were poor, they used to go to the fire station for soup. The firemen would make soup, and everybody can come there no matter what. You would come there and they give you a bowl of soup just to help you. but they all worked in the factories, and they donated their monies to these churches, and they built these beautiful churches back in the 20s and the 30s. I mean, you go through Detroit and there's these beautiful cathedrals. I'm sure you had the same in New York, but it's just incredible. As good as beautiful as anything in Europe.
Well, Bob, it sounds like you had a great time doing this.
Oh, I loved it. I loved it, And I put a bunch of recipes in the back too. A lot of our heritage is our food, our gawumpkies and our
Pierogies.
pierogies. Yes, yes. Oh man, hey, you know what? I don't know how life would be without a pierogi.
Me neither, Bob. Thanks so much. Sherry Jesenicki started writing her Candles in the Mist series when she was just 17. And when other publishers failed her, she turned a page. And now, several decades later, her series is finished. And we have Candles in the Mist Book 1, Limelight's Challenge series.
Well, the books, I started writing the books when I went to my niece's wedding, and the entire wedding was about how she was going to be this nice, subservient little wife and do exactly what her husband told her and never disobey him.
Wait a minute. What year was this wedding?
Oh, that was in the early 70s.
You must have been horrified.
I was like, what in the world is wrong with you? I said, you're agreeing to this? And actually, to tell you the truth, she does live like that right now. Anyway, I wrote the books because I wanted to give young women a voice to say, I'm not going to do what you tell me to do. I'm going to do what I want to do. And to say, I am not going to be a subservient person. I'm going to be an independent and viable person in my own world. The story's about a character named Jaslyn Manshir, and she is a warrior. She's a sword fighting, what I call a star mate, which means she's able to bring the power of one of her ancestors or a relative to fight with her when she fights. And it's pretty magical and exciting. And there's also spell speakers, which are wizards. It's quite a bit of fantasy in it. Jaslyn fights to kill this traitor who helped to murder her husband, and then they discover that there is this evil being in another part of their world that wants to destroy all life and put an end to it. So they have to go fight him. Well, she's traveling to this other part of the world to fight this bad guy. And that's as far as this story goes.
Oh, okay. And then it continues in book 2. And you said there's 4 books altogether?
Yeah, but I'm thinking, go to the local libraries or bookstores and do book signings. This is going to sound a little weird, but I dreamed the book before I wrote it. I had a dream, and the next morning I woke up and wrote it down, and it was the book. That's the truth. That really happened, and that was pretty exciting for me to dream the story and then to write it.
Yeah, we've heard that so many times on this show. It's got to be true. All right, Sherry, thank you. Kimberly Campbell wrote her first book about her sister, the pack rat, an infamous hoarder, when she was only 8 years old. And then she read every children's book she could get her hands on until one day she wrote one of her own. It's entitled, I Will So I Can.
Well, so the inspiration is about willpower. I had a teacher in 3rd grade. I lived in Kissingen, Germany for a few years, and I had a teacher, my 3rd grade teacher. Her name was Miss Kaiser, and she always used to say, you are an American, emphasizing the I can on American. And then she also used to tell me, where there's a will, there's a way, and that always stuck with me. So when I, got the idea for this book, it was based on a young boy who just could not believe that he can have so much fun. And so he wants to have this adventurous day. And his father, which this book kind of requires some, if you're a critical thinker, if you can think out the box. I use the term father and versus, dad, or even giving the father character a name, because it's really based on God and how God helps us through our days. And so if we believe in ourselves and we use God, he can help us through anything, help us achieve anything. And so that's why the character father is referenced as father. And so Joseph is having this extra fun day where he's sailing in a boat across the ocean, climbing the mountains, taking a hot air balloon ride, things that we don't get to do on a daily basis when you think of, a fun day. And so by the end of the story, he's accomplished all these things. And so now his confidence is through the roof because he's like, yeah, I can do it. And then he wants to show his appreciation, to his father. And he makes his father dinner. The dinner looks pretty yucky. And that was my intention. And the father says, I can't eat that. But really, he can't eat it. Not because it looks totally disgusting, but because he's spirit. So if the reader gets it, fine. They're still going to get the message that if you strive, you'll accomplish. But if they get the other meaning that God is always with you and will help you achieve, that's even better.
Nice. That's so sweet. Have you been able to read this to kids?
I have. I've shared it with my own, who the book is dedicated to, but I haven't, been able to get it in a population just yet. I can find a way to get that done though.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
Absolutely.
How many kids do you have?
I have 8.
You have 8 children. How old are they?
So the older children are 20, 24, 22, 20, and 17. And then I have a 10, 7, 3, and 2-year-old.
Well, the little ones will make friends, and then you can read it to them.
But with my 10-year-old and 7-year-old daughter, that is who I'll be writing my next 2 books with, 2 more children's books with.
Wow. You're amazing. And you work full time?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
Next time an author says, I don't have time, I'm going to send them right to you. All right, Kimberly? We are out of time on the Page Publishing Book Club. Go to 710WOR.com to download the podcast. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. I'll catch you next time.